This podcast details true crime cases. It contains adult themes and may contain descriptions of violence. It is not intended for children. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Once Upon a Crime. Today we're marking a significant milestone, Once Upon a Crime's 8th birthday. It's been an incredible journey since I launched the podcast on June 9th, 2016, with our first series, Lost and Found. I remember releasing all 3 episodes of that series on the same day, and we've been on a thrilling ride ever since, now boasting over 320 episodes. We're kicking off Season 9 with a series about family annihilators, or those who kill multiple members of their family at once. One of the most downloaded episodes in our history was a story about a family annihilator, John List. In 1971, 46-year-old John List murdered his entire family, his wife of 20 years, his 3 children, and his 84-year-old mother. A worldwide manhunt ensued, but List evaded capture for almost 18 years. If you want to listen to the whole story, you can hear it in episode 39 of Season 1 of Once Upon a Crime. This episode was first released as an exclusive early release episode at CrimeCon 2024 in Nashville on the weekend of June 1st, and it features a case from that great city. 25-year-old Michael Cummins carried out one of the worst mass murders in Tennessee's history. He was charged with 8 murders, including 6 family members. Experienced law enforcement officers would call it one of the most horrific crime scenes they'd ever encountered. This is Season 9, Episode 321, Tennessee's Family Annihilator, Michael Cummins. Michael Lee Cummins was something of a town terror. He lived in a rural area of Sumner County, Tennessee, just south of the Kentucky border, outside the town of Westmoreland. Neighbors and local cops were very familiar with Michael Cummins. In a town of 2,700 residents and only about 800 households, this is probably not surprising. In small-town America, most know each other by sight and even by name. Even so, Michael Cummins stood out from others because of his often odd behavior and his run-ins with the law. In 2019, 25-year-old Cummins lived on Charles Brown Road with his parents, Clara and David, and extended family members. The Cummins family's home was on a large plot of land outside the town proper. Neighbors reported Cummins as a town menace for years. "He terrorized our neighborhood forever," Bill Hayes, a resident of Charles Brown Road, said. Cummins was a thief. He, quote, stole 4-wheelers, lawnmowers, anything he could get his hands on, Hayes said. Michael Cummins grew up in the area and graduated from Westmoreland High School. He had a daughter from a previous relationship. After he split with her mother, he saw his child infrequently. It was common knowledge that Cummins was troubled. It was assumed he had issues with his mental health, but whether he'd been diagnosed or with what wasn't discussed among locals. In small towns, gossip might be a common pastime, but people tend to mind their own business for the most part. What goes on in families behind closed doors was private, and it's not considered polite to pry. Petty theft, breaking and entering, and the like are certainly unwelcome occurrences, especially among neighbors. So this alone could have made Michael Cummins persona non grata, but there was more. In addition, there were drug violations and protective orders filed against him in his late teens and early 20s. In 2012, he was found with a 17-year-old girl with whom he'd been ordered to have no contact. He was cited for drug possession during that arrest as well. Cummins tended to get aggravated quickly and fly off the handle. Sometimes it was with neighbors, and other times it was with his family members. Any perceived slight by another person could set him off. People often weren't clear about precisely what made him so angry, but his behavior escalated over time to such a degree that after one arrest, he was ordered to undergo a mental health evaluation. In the summer of 2013, Cummins' aunt called the police for help. Michael had become angry and, quote, blacked out in anger after he came to believe that his aunt accused him of stealing from her. According to the police report, he began throwing objects and, quote, tearing things up in the house. He was arrested. After the charge was reduced to simple assault, he was ordered to serve 150 days in jail. In February 2017, he was arrested for stealing from a neighbor's home. He was charged with theft and pled guilty. He received no jail time, but was instead placed on supervised probation and once again ordered to complete mental health treatment. Just a few months later, Cummins was arrested once more. This time his mother called the police after he arrived at the house and demanded money from her. He then began taking other items from the home. Cummins wasn't living with his parents at this time, and it also appears that they may have had a protection order against him. The police reports state that he was in his mother's house, quote, where he was not supposed to be anymore, end quote. When she refused to give him money, Cummins became angry. His grandmother, who was present at the time, tried to intervene in the situation, and Cummins attacked her. He was arrested and charged with domestic assault and robbery. He pleaded guilty to the charges and was ordered to attend domestic violence classes and not to have contact with his grandmother. He served 2 months in jail. Those of you who know my background know that I have a degree in psychology and have worked in the mental health field. My field of specialty was counseling teens and young adults who were or had formerly been incarcerated and who had emotional issues or a diagnosed mental illness. Common triggers for those who deal with such challenges are life stressors such as divorce, unemployment, illness, homelessness, etc. Stress can contribute to emotional or mental breakdown in anyone, but those who are already struggling with their mental health are particularly susceptible. Michael Cummins had displayed behavior consistent with a fragile mental state. Later, his sister would be interviewed, and she would state that she recalled Michael was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and, quote, something else when he was a child. I'm sharing this information as a preface to how Michael's behavior continued to escalate and become more frequent. Violent behavior towards others is not a common occurrence in those who are diagnosed with bipolar disorder or other types of mental illness. In fact, those who have a severe mental illness tend towards self-harm in much higher numbers than those who turn their behavior outward. This is especially true if the mental illness has gone untreated or is inadequately treated. In early 2017, Michael Cummins was arrested several times and either served probation or was given a short sentence and required to receive mental health treatment. Another condition of his probation was the requirement that he complete classes to help him better deal with stress, including domestic violence prevention and anger management. However, Cummins did not adhere to most of these stipulations. It appears that by the time he was in his early 20s, his mental health began to decline rapidly. He likely had some form of treatment as a minor, but when he reached 18, or the age of majority in the United States, these interventions ended, perhaps because he refused them. We'll see evidence that this is likely true later in this episode. Now without treatment, his behavior resulted in several arrests and periods of incarceration. This could have further contributed to his mental decline. Most inmates, other than those deemed profoundly ill, receive little in the way of mental health treatment while they are incarcerated. Add to that the stress of arrest and incarceration itself, and we begin to understand how offender recidivism rates are so high among those inmates with mental illness. Michael Cummins was released after serving 2 months in jail for the attack on his grandmother. Just weeks later, he committed another violent act, this time against a neighbor. It's shaping up to be a long, hot summer. I enjoy the beach, sun and sand, longer days for bike rides, etc. But what I don't enjoy is body odor that may result from being hot and sweaty. And you know, underarms aren't the only places we have odor. And you don't want an embarrassing incident like being at the gym and detecting an unpleasant smell, and then realizing it came from you. With Lumi, you can bid farewell to body odor worries. Lumi Whole Body Deodorant is a game changer, designed to keep you fresh from underarms to belly buttons and anywhere else body odor might strike. What sets Lumi apart is its unique formulation, pH balance, and the fact that it's aluminum-free and safe for your skin. Plus, it's proven to control odor for an impressive 72 hours. Now that's something to rave about. I'm absolutely in love with this product. Lumi offers stick and cream deodorants, odor control body wash, cleansing bars, and deodorant wipes that will keep you odor-free and smelling fantastic. I particularly adore Lumi's acidified body washes, powered by a gentle alpha hydroxy acid to control odor. And the best part? They come in delightful scents like toasted coconut, my summer fave, and clean tangerine. There's also an unscented version for those who prefer it. And here's a special treat for my listeners. As new customers, you can enjoy a 15% discount on all Lumi products with our exclusive code and link. Just use code ONCE at lumideodorant.com. That's LUMEDEODORANT.com. Don't miss out on this exclusive offer. Lumi Starter Pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. As a special offer for our listeners, new customers get 15% off all Lumi products with our exclusive code ONCE. And if you combine the 15% off with the already discounted starter pack, that equals over 40% off your starter pack when you visit lumideodorant.com and use code ONCE. And we thank Lumi for sponsoring this episode. People later reported seeing Michael Cummins walking around the neighborhood, talking to himself or yelling angrily. What precipitated his next act of violence is unclear, but it seems that Cummins decided he had a beef with one of these neighbors. On September 13, 2017, a woman was inside her home on Charles Brown Road, just down the block from the Cummins family. She smelled smoke and went outside to investigate. Her home was on fire. As she rushed to put it out, Michael Cummins appeared, shoved her to the ground, and began pulling her hair. Cummins had attempted to burn her house down by shoving flammable material like newspapers between the home's subflooring and insulation. Luckily, he was unsuccessful. Cummins was charged with aggravated arson and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Even though he continued to rant that he would, quote, finish the job once he was released, he was given a probation hearing after serving a year in prison. Because of his mental health condition, he was allowed to plead guilty to aggravated assault and attempted arson and be resentenced to 10 years probation. He accepted the deal on July 19, 2018, with a stipulation that he has no contact with his victim and that he undergo a mental health evaluation. He was not sentenced to a mental health facility, nor does it appear that he'd received treatment to the degree that he was considered stable and not a threat to the community before his release. Cummins was required to serve another 180 days in prison before being released in January 2019. He soon stopped complying with the conditions of his probation. When his probation officer arrived for a home visit in April, Cummins left to avoid him and didn't answer phone calls. He also skipped his regular visit to the parole office 2 days later on April 12th. He'd also failed to undergo the mental health evaluation. It was also reported that Cummins had violated the no-contact order with the neighbor whose home he'd attempted to burn down. You can only imagine how thrilled she must have been to find out her arsonist had been released so soon back into her community. Because of these violations, Cummins was slated to be arrested and sent back to prison. However, it was the policy of the Tennessee Department of Corrections to wait 15 to 30 days before filing arrest warrants on probation violations. The explanation for this was that the department would research the reason for the violation before deciding to take action. This was to determine that violations were not simply due to changing circumstances, such as the person no longer having access to transportation, changes in their work schedule, etc. For this reason, an arrest warrant for Michael Cummins would not be issued until April 26th. On April 26th, Cummins appeared oddly attired at his uncle's trailer home, about a mile from his family's home. According to his cousin Dwayne, he was wearing, quote, girls' shoes. He borrowed another pair of shoes from Dwayne and left the ones he was wearing there. The next evening, at about 5:30 p.m., the police responded to a 911 call from Charles Brown Road. Carlotta Clinard and her fiancé, Timothy Meadows, had traveled to Clara and David Cummins' home on Charles Brown Road after they could not contact her mother, Nanny. Carlotta was Clara Cummins' sister and Michael Cummins' aunt. Mary Hosell, called Nanny, also resided in the home, as did Charles Hosell, Carlotta and Clara's brother, Charles's girlfriend, Rachel, and Rachel's 12-year-old daughter, Sapphire. Carlotta had not heard from her mother for a couple of days, and no one was answering the phone. She and Tim decided to make sure all was well. All was not well. When they arrived, the house stood silent. They tried to open the front door, but it appeared to be stuck. Tim pushed on it and saw that a bed had been wedged against it. Once inside, Carlotta walked into the front room. She soon turned and ran out of the house to call 911. Her fiancé entered. At first, his mind couldn't comprehend what he saw. He described it as bloody and horrific. Quote, "You might describe it as a war scene," Meadows later tearfully told reporters. "There was blood. There were lacerations. It was awful. It was uncanny. I don't know how to explain it. I can't explain what I saw. It was so terrible. I don't even want to remember it," he trailed off, bursting into sobs. There were bodies scattered throughout the home. There was so much blood, it was unclear if the victims had been stabbed, beaten, or shot, or all three. Carlotta was frantic to find her mother. She finally located Nanny amongst the bodies. Meadows said, in contrast to the other victims, quote, "I knew she was alive because she still had color." They pleaded with 911 to send paramedics quickly. Mary Hosell appears to have been bludgeoned. Her injuries were so severe when paramedics arrived, Carlotta described the scene this way to News Channel 5. Quote, "They pulled my mother out, and I didn't even know who the woman was. I was like, 'Who is she?' I said, 'I don't know who that is.'" End quote. At 7:10 p.m., responding officers from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations reported finding 6 bodies in the home. The victims would later be identified as members of Michael Cummins' family. His mother, Clara Cummins, age 44, his father, David Cummins, age 51, his uncle, Charles Hosell, age 45, Charles's girlfriend, Rachel McLaughlin P., 43, Rachel's daughter, Sapphire McLaughlin P., 12, Rachel's mother, Marcia Knuckles, 64, and his grandmother, Mary Sue Hosell, the only person in the home who'd survived the attack. It was one of the most complex and gruesome crime scenes we'd ever encountered, a TBI spokesperson would report. District Attorney Ray Whitley would later make a statement about the mass murder, saying it was, quote, "one of the most horrific cases he'd ever had to deal with in his 40-year career." Evidence at the scene led investigators to consider 25-year-old Michael Cummins their prime suspect in the murders, and to another gruesome murder just days earlier. On April 17th, the headless body of 63-year-old James Fox Dunn Jr. was discovered about 75 yards from a burned cabin outside of Westmoreland. The head was found lying about 25 yards away from the body. It was determined that Dunn had died as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. Dunn lived on the 1200 block of Ransom Mandrell Road, about a mile from the Cummins home. During the investigation into Dunn's murder, it was discovered that items, including a rifle, had been taken from Dunn's home. The missing rifle was found left behind at the Cummins residence. While investigators were just beginning to secure the crime scene, another homicide was reported. 69-year-old Shirley Fairley's body was found at her home on Luby Brown Road, less than 1/8 of a mile from the location of the mass murder. Her car, a black Kia Forte, was missing. Investigators believe Fairley's murder was connected to the others. Michael Cummins was now being sought as a suspect in 8 murders and 1 attempted murder. At 7:30 p.m., 2 hours after Carlotta Clenard called 911 to report her family's massacre, police named him as a person of interest. A manhunt began in the area by land and air, with more than 100 law enforcement agents aiding in the search for the fugitive. Cummins was said to be armed and dangerous, and most likely hiding somewhere nearby. Residents were advised to lock their doors and windows and stay indoors. Less than 2 hours later, they breathed a sigh of relief when it was reported that Michael Cummins was in custody. He was found hiding in a creek bed less than a mile from the crime scene. He attempted to flee, but was shot and injured by a SWAT team member. He was transported to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The chief medical examiner determined that all the victims died from blunt force trauma. All had received multiple blows to the head, and some also received sharp force injuries. Investigators believe that Cummins had used a hatchet and a baseball bat in the commission of the murders. Michael Cummins was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. His trial was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. He underwent several mental health evaluations between 2019 and 2022. Prosecutors were determined to seek the death penalty, and the issue of his competence to stand trial was necessary before a capital sentence could be considered. In June 2022, Cummins was found fit to stand trial. Prosecutors prepared to present their case against him in 2 separate trials. On August 16, 2023, Michael Cummins pled guilty to all 8 charges of first-degree murder. In exchange for his guilty plea, the death penalty was withdrawn, and he agreed to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sumner County District Attorney Ray Whitley said the decision to seek the death penalty had been reversed based on new evidence regarding Cummins' mental health. The DA stated that Cummins' brain scan showed, quote, significant problems and impairment of brain activity. He also cited the length of the death penalty proceedings in his decision. Quote, we wanted to bring finality to the case because if Cummins had gotten the death penalty, this case would have gone on for years and gone from court to court, he stated. Cummins was also sentenced to an additional 10 years for the attempted murder of his grandmother, Mary Sue Hosale. Hosale died in 2022. It was reported that her health declined significantly due to the severe injuries she'd sustained in the attack, which her family believes led to her death. Upon sentencing, Judge D. David Gray expressed his hope that the guilty pleas would help bring closure to the Cummins family and the families of all the victims. He made a promise to them and the community, vowing, quote, Mr. Cummins will never see life outside of the Tennessee State Penitentiary. You can rest easy with that, end quote. The media interviewed the surviving members of the Cummins family frequently. The public was eager to know how this terrible crime had happened and how Michael Cummins could have wiped out so many of his loved ones in addition to 2 strangers in cold blood. His family, who shared these questions, struggled to find answers. They admitted that Michael had a history of violent behavior and often threatened to kill people. They had attributed these statements to his mental illness and never believed he'd genuinely act on it. Some family members said that he'd suffered from mild schizophrenia and depression for years. Quote, Michael always talked about hurting people, or hurting himself, or killing people, one family member said. Tim Meadows, one of the first people to discover the murders, said this about Michael Cummins, quote, I guess we wanted to numb our minds that he wouldn't. I guess we wanted to believe that he loved his family enough that he wouldn't do that, end quote. Michael Cummins' sister, Crystal, escaped being a victim because she'd actively been avoiding her brother at the time of the murders. She said Michael had been, quote, acting crazy since he got out of jail in January, so I kind of steered clear of him lately. The last time she'd seen her brother was about a week prior to the crime. Crystal said her parents and uncle had, quote, helped him out so many times. He got everything he needed and wanted from them, end quote. She also reported that her mother had been trying to get him into a mental health facility in the weeks before she was murdered, but, quote, he didn't want to go and wouldn't take his medication. Members of the community would ask, with so many red flags regarding Michael Cummins' violent behavior, why wasn't more done? A neighbor, commenting on the 2017 arson charge, said, Cummins tried burning his next-door neighbor's house down and said he was going to kill her. I don't know why they would let him out after all the trouble he's had in the past. If he were still in jail, his family would still be living. The lady down the road would still be living. This case reminds me in some ways of the Darren Schillmiller case I recently covered in episode 320. Schillmiller had a history of problematic behavior and was believed to be a child predator and perhaps worse, by his small rural community. These suspected crimes were gossiped about, but mainly went unreported. In some close-knit smaller communities, people may feel they can keep an eye on each other and may not fear those they know the way they might fear strangers. Perhaps, as Mr. Meadow said, they numb themselves to the possibility that something so horrible could happen in their homes, families, or communities. As I stated earlier, the majority of the mentally ill, even those who are diagnosed with schizoaffective disorders, are not violent. Still, Michael Cummins had a history of threats and violent behavior. So I'll put the question to you listeners. How much should family members, law enforcement, and the courts be allowed to intervene, and to what degree? Should a person who makes threats or who has committed simple assault be ordered to undergo mental health treatment in a locked facility? Should they be forced to take medication? What if they commit more serious acts of violence against family members? Should it be the family's decision whether or not to press charges, or should the law require it on the assumption that they may also be a threat to the public? As you can see, this issue is complex. Many in the mental health field, public safety officers, and legislators grapple to understand what is actual versus what is perceived threat and when intervention is warranted. The last word I'll give on this heartbreaking case is this: no one saw it coming, and no one could have predicted it. I believe it was incumbent by the courts to keep the community safe and should have made Cummins serve more of his 10-year sentence on the arson charge. However, unless he'd gotten treatment while in prison and received ongoing treatment after his release that was closely supervised, it is likely Michael Cummins would still have been a danger to the community. Even so, no one could have predicted that he would commit one of the worst mass murders in the history of the state of Tennessee. Something like that is simply unknowable. That will do it for this episode of Once Upon a Crime. If you're listening because you visited me on Podcast Row at CrimeCon, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed CrimeCon and will make it an annual event to attend. And to everyone, thank you all for your continued support as we begin Season 9. I can't believe I've been able to share my true crime stories with all of you for close to a decade. When we do reach our 10th birthday, we'll be sure to have a celebration and include you in the party. I hope you'll join me every Monday for a new episode of Once Upon a Crime. Make sure to like, follow, or subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also watch accompanying videos on YouTube. Look for Once Upon a Crime podcast on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. There's a link in the show notes. Once Upon a Crime was written and produced by me, Esther Sanchez Ludlow. My executive producer is Lorena Garcia. Our researcher is Emma Battaglia. Until next time, be good to one another.